Before the break, we asked how many #1 singles has Mr. Blobby had, and the answer is A, just one. Mr. Blobby was the title of that single, answering the important questions here on Jeremy Vine Extra. Welcome back. I am joined by Dr. Amos Ogunkoya and comedian Dave Chawner. It's time now for Talking Health, the section of our show is devoted to answering your questions. And today we're discussing how to talk about eating disorders. So any questions that you might have, give us a call and hopefully Dr. Amos and Dave will be able to answer them and offer some advice. 0207 862 2222 is the number. So today marks the beginning of Eating Disorders Awareness Week. Mental health charity Beat reports that over 1 million people in the UK have an eating disorder, and the figures show that there has been a significant rise in eating disorders, particularly amongst men. So I'm going to speak first to Dr. Amos. Now, we hear about eating disorders, it's quite a broad term. What are we talking about here?
It is a very broad term, and I'm not sure if that's very useful, the subtypes. So eating disorders, I like to talk to patients and say it's a disordered relationship with food, okay? And it's not necessarily just about what you eat and what type of food you eat. It's more about how you feel when you engage in those behaviours. So we find that there's a lot of emotional attachments with food. Mm-hmm. So it's a disordered emotional attachment with food, really, and that's what we would say eating disorder is.
And Dave, you've experienced this personally with anorexia. Mm-hmm. At what point did you realise there was an issue?
I think like really late, because I don't think that's that different. Like I think for a lot of mental health things, people around you have a much better perspective on what's going on than you do yourself. And it was like, it took me about 6 years to realise that I got a problem, and like even like 3 longer, so 9 years until I started treatment.
And what was that realisation? Did a loved one say, I think there could be an issue here, or...?
It was just simply depression. So I went to the doctors for like depression, and I remember very specifically that I said, look, I want to be treated for the depression, not the anorexia. And I kind of played the system a little bit to stay out of inpatient treatment. But a brilliant nurse told me something I thought was brilliant. And she said, look, you wouldn't expect your laptop to work if you don't charge it. Why are you expecting your brain to work if you don't feed it? And I think that's why I like talking about things in really kind of down to earth, kind of common analogies is actually really useful.
Definitely. So did you approach this conversation with any family members, or...?
I still get a little bit uncomfortable talking. I suppose there's guilt. I think there's a lot of guilt talking about eating, because I put my family through a lot, but I'm very kind of comfortable now talking about it to other people. But yeah, I think I feel bad for what the family went through.
And that's why awareness is so important. There's a lot of shame like attributed with eating disorders, and it's breaking down that barrier and having the conversation out in the open. I think that would be really useful I find that's useful to patients if they come in with their mum or their dad, because it is it's a young person's illness. Well, it can affect everyone, but we're seeing it spikes in the 12 to 25-year-olds at the moment, is having that non-judgmental conversation whereby we offer them information and they can digest it in their own time.
And when you say shame, it sounds a lot like you're taking responsibility for it, rather than, if somebody has a cold, you have a cold, it wasn't your fault, you have the cold, you're not responsible for that. Would that be fair to say?
That is fair to say. It's because it has a physical ramification. So your relationship with food, people don't really see it as a mental health issue. They see it as a behaviour issue. Whereas we don't realise our emotions play into our behaviours, and we can change. That's what feeds back into the treatment. We look at what underlies the eating patterns, and we try and improve that. So it could be self-esteem, it could be stress, it could be so many different things that we try and target in terms of treatment.
Now, there's also been a rise amongst men. Do you think, Dave, men have a particular difficulty in talking about things that they might be struggling with? Could that be a reason?
I think generally, like, blokes find it quite difficult to talk about emotions. I was never given the emotional language. And we actually know that, like, one of the first diagnostic criteria of pretty much any mental illness is an inability to communicate, because the cerebral cortex, which plays a role in perception, thought and language, that starts shutting down. So I think that's really difficult. But I also think as well, I didn't realise that it was that much of a problem. I thought I kind of enjoyed it for a little bit of a while. I thought that I could give it up whenever I wanted. And also, something I think is so key is everyone talks about recovery as taking the anorexia away. No one talks about giving anything back. So everyone was saying, you've got loads to lose. Everyone was saying, instead of saying you were getting better, people kept on saying, well, take that eating disorder away. And although it had massive implications. At the time, I enjoyed it. At the time, it was something that helped me make sense of the world. So of course I wouldn't engage in treatment, because everyone was talking about what I've got to lose. No one talked about what I've got to gain.
That's really interesting. Also, you're a comedian, right? So do you think it's important we take, I know we've given you a topic that perhaps is a bit more difficult, but your aim is actually to change the tone around the conversation and make it less sort of doom and gloomy, is that it? And bring it more open, so people feel more relaxed about speaking.
Couldn't agree more. Because I think, like, bottom line, you're going to make people who have experience of eating disorders feel less alone, but you can also educate and entertain people that are lucky enough to have no experience, because they actually think that more blokes suffer with bulimia than women do suffer with anorexia. And about 25% of people with anorexia are blokes, but, you know, 50% of eating disorders are made up of EDNOS, which stands for eating disorders not otherwise specified. So things that don't fit into anorexia or bulimia. And that's about a 50-50 split of men and women. But generally, anorexia kind of gets a lot of the attention, but it's not only anorexia that is what an eating disorder.
I was reading through a list of the eating disorders this morning, and some that I've never even heard of. So it must be very difficult. If I've never heard of them, then the likelihood of someone at home having heard of them is slimmer. And how are you going to speak to somebody about something that you don't even know exists, really?
But this is the main thing. I think Dave touched on some of it here. Insight is such a massive thing when it comes to mental health. And it's almost a prerequisite of having bad mental health is not having the insight. So in terms of, it's usually other people that spot the issues, and it usually takes someone nudging them in the right way for them to change their worldview and change how they see things. And you mentioned that having that conversation about charging yourself made you think about whether the depression led you to have some of the eating problems. And it's as a professional, and when I talk to my patient, it's trying to disrupt some of that disordered thinking that really helps direct them in the right way.
So what can somebody do? First of all, what can somebody do if they think a loved one has one of these eating disorders? How would you approach that conversation? How would you advise somebody to approach it?
So there's some really good practical things that you should do. Okay, so we spoke about shame. So one of the best things you can do is have the conversation one-on-one with someone, okay? Very important, try not to have the conversation in and around meals, okay? That can be, because it's triggering, and when someone is in that vulnerable state, it makes it harder for them to digest. The other thing as well is be prepared to trigger some anger, some denial, and don't react to that. And that's really difficult. And it's probably a little bit easier for caregivers, but it'd be quite hard to see someone that's in trouble and them not listen. The aim of the conversation initially should be to get them to rethink some of their behaviors. You don't have to change them all in one conversation. You can revisit the conversation. So having that open dialogue, have information at hand. Beat is an amazing charity. They've got leaflets, they've got even the website, even the number. Leave that with them. That's really important. These practical things will help them get there.
But importantly, don't make them feel shame about it.
Yes.
That seems to be a recurring theme. Michelle, you're on the phone now from Staffordshire. What's your question? I believe it's for Dr. Amos.
Oh, hi, yes. Basically, it's about my 9-year-old daughter. She suffers with quite bad anxiety, which has led to problems with eating. She can't eat in front of people. She's quite restrictive of what's eating. And the problem I'm having is that the dietitian's saying it's a psychological thing, but the people that she's supposed to be having therapy with are saying it's an eating thing, and I'm just getting nowhere of addressing what to do, and I'm a bit stuck, really.
Okay, so there's two different groups of people who think it's a different cause.
Yes.
I think the main thing is, in terms of, the one thing that I think Dave mentioned as well is the anxiety will be leading to some of the eating problems. So we need to tackle both. So instead of one or the other, I think your daughter needs both interventions. I don't think we should be trying to split it, because I think we need to deal with the anxiety and then we need to make sure she's nutritionally provided for. So what I would go to do is speak to your GP and say you need to have a two-pronged approach with this, especially for a 9-year-old.
Dave, do you have any advice for Michelle just in terms of a loved one approaching the conversation with their child?
So my first thing, Michelle, have you spoken to your daughter about this? Yeah.
Yeah, I have. And it's quite difficult because she's quite closed off. I mean, the issue it's regarding is that Dad left the family home 2.5 years ago, got remarried, and it's very much around that. So it's a very sort of like ongoing thing, and it's taken quite a while. I mean, it's taken 2 years to really start opening up. So we're still in the process of still trying to get her to talk, if that makes sense, but it's very hard.
So I think first thing is obviously it's going to take time, and it sounds difficult for you as it does for her. I think distractions are really good. So I don't know if you ever did anything together, like playing Scrabble, or like if you ever went for walks or anything like that. Just something that means that it's not just that conversation to make it less intense. Yeah, go on.
Yes, because I'm finding at the moment I've had an issue regarding school, because they feel that, you know, if she saw her dad, because she's obviously not having contact with us for different reasons, so that would be the problem. And it's like I said, she doesn't like talking about them at all. But I mean, the thing that she does love is animals. So we do a lot of things around animals and things like that. So
I think that's great. What, like have a doggy date or like something like that, and kind of enjoy, like, if she can associate this conversation with something fun, something good, that's great, because I think motivation is really, really key. And actually rewarding the process rather than looking on stuff that she needs to achieve, actually rewarding how she's getting better. And don't forget, it's always about baby steps. And if you do need any more help and support, it's beateatingdisorders.org.uk. They've got web chat, they've got email support, they've got phone lines, but they've also got support for carers as well, because I think it's really important that you look after yourself as well as looking after your daughter.
Michelle, I really hope that helped. Thank you so much for your call, and all the best for both you and your daughter. I wish you just tremendous amounts of good. We've got lots of messages actually online. I think this might be a more difficult conversation for people to call with, so a lot of people have got in contact online. Annie on Facebook says, I've never had food issues until the last 6 months or so. When I come home, I can't control the hunger. No matter how much I have eaten at dinner, I spend the evenings looking for more food. I can't sleep as I'm hungry. What do I do? Does this sound like an eating disorder, Dr. Amos?
Yeah, I would need more information, but I think we need to just check if there's not something else going on here. So, I mean, I would go to your GP, get a blood test just to make sure there's nothing else we're missing hormonally that might be going on, that might be triggering some of these eating issues. If it's a craving, or if this was associated with a feeling, so she felt bad and then felt like she needed to binge, then I would say it was an eating disorder. But at this moment, without that information, it's hard to say. But she definitely needs to go and see a GP, because this isn't normal for her.
And talk about it. The fact that you've messaged in as well shows that you're willing to be open. So if we could all just talk about it a little bit more, that would be beneficial. Well, thank you very much both to Dave and Dr. Amos for coming in to do just that and answer your calls on this. So if you know anyone who is struggling with an eating disorder, or you want some support and advice for yourself, then we have links to various websites. Just head to our Facebook page or Twitter, and you'll find them there. We are going to have to move on now, though, and after the break, is telly better with subtitles on? 2/3 of 18 to 24-year-olds say that they can't watch television without them. Are they just being lazy? 0207 862 2222 is the number, and we'll speak to you right after this. Which Scottish city is home to the country's oldest bridge? Is it A, Glasgow, B, Aberdeen, or C, St Andrews? Find out which after the break.